The firelight caught the tears on Zimmerman's face before she could wipe them away, and she kept her head down, hoping the darkness beyond her small circle of warmth would hide her from whatever predator she sensed watching from the trees. She had been sitting by this fire for 3 hours now, spinning wool because her hands needed something to do or else they would shake uncontrollably from fear and exhaustion. The spindle turned between her practiced fingers, the rhythm soothing even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She was 2 days' ride from Williamsburg, Virginia, lost in the wilderness of the Blue Ridge Mountains in the autumn of 1867, and she had no idea if she would ever see civilization again. The snap of a branch made her freeze, her fingers stilling on the wool. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night air, and Deanna held her breath. She had her father's old pistol tucked into her skirt, but she had never fired it at anything living, and the thought of doing so made her stomach turn. Another sound, closer this time, the deliberate crunch of boots on fallen leaves. Someone was approaching, and they were not trying to hide their presence anymore. "Easy now," came a deep voice from beyond the firelight. "I am not here to hurt you." Deanna's hand moved toward the pistol, but she did not draw it. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Then show yourself." A man stepped into the light, and Diana's breath caught despite her fear. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the darkness behind him. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin clothing that had seen hard use, and he carried a rifle in one hand with the ease of someone who had been born holding one. His arms were corded with muscle, visible even beneath his shirt, and his chest was broad and powerful. Everything about him spoke of strength and survival in these harsh mountains. "I saw your fire from my camp about a mile north," he said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "No one should be out here alone, especially not spinning wool like they are sitting in their parlor back home." "I did not have much choice in the matter," Deanna said, her chin lifting. "And I needed something to occupy my hands." The man's eyes, she noticed, were a striking blue even in the firelight. They swept over her camp, taking in her meager supplies, her tired horse tied to a nearby tree, and the small bundle that contained everything she had left in the world. His expression softened slightly. "Your fire is going to die soon," he said. "It is going to get cold tonight." "May I add some wood?" Deanna hesitated. Everything her mother had taught her about propriety said she should refuse, should send this stranger away. But her mother was dead, along with her father and younger brother, claimed by fever 6 weeks ago. The farm had been taken by creditors, and Diana had fled west with what little she could carry, hoping to reach her aunt in Tennessee. She had gotten lost 3 days ago when her map had blown away in a sudden wind, and now she was alone in mountains that seemed determined to swallow her whole. "Yes," she said finally. "Thank you." The man moved with surprising quiet for someone his size. He gathered wood from the forest floor, selecting pieces with a practiced eye. Deanna watched as he built up her fire properly, creating a structure that would burn hot and last through the night. His hands were large and scarred, capable hands that spoke of years of hard work and harder living. "My name is Xavier Paulson," he said as he worked. "I have been living in these mountains for near about 8 years now. I trap and hunt, trade my furs down in Williamsburg twice a year. I have a cabin about 3 miles from here, built it myself 5 years back." "Diana Zimmerman," she replied, her fingers resuming their work on the wool. The spindle turned, pulling the raw wool into thread, the motion as natural to her as breathing. "I was heading to Tennessee to stay with my aunt. I got lost when the wind took my map." Xavier settled back on his heels, the fire now blazing warmly. "Tennessee is south and west from here. You have been heading north for the past day at least, maybe more." Deanna's heart sank, but she refused to let the despair show on her face. "Then I will turn around tomorrow and head the right way. These mountains are not forgiving to travelers, especially ones alone." Xavier's voice was gentle despite its depth. "The weather is turning. We will have snow within the week, maybe sooner. If you get caught in a storm out here, you will not survive." "What would you have me do?" Deanna asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded. "I have nowhere else to go. My family is dead, our farm is gone. My aunt is the only relation I have left in this world." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire. Then he looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made Deanna's breath catch. Not threat, not hunger, but a kind of lonely understanding that spoke to the hollow place in her own chest. "My cabin has 2 rooms," he said slowly. "You could stay there through the winter. Come spring, the passes will be clear and I can guide you to Tennessee myself. I know these mountains like I know my own hands. I can get you to your aunt safely." "I could not possibly impose," Deanna said automatically, even as part of her scream to accept, to take this lifeline being offered. "You would not be imposing. The cabin is plenty big enough, and truth be told, it might be nice to have someone to talk to besides the trees and the deer." Xavier's mouth quirked slightly under his beard. "I am not going to pretend I am some gentleman. I am not. I have been living rough for a long time. But I give you my word, my sacred word, that you would be safe under my roof. I would sleep in the barn with the horses before I would let any harm come to you." Deanna studied him, this mountain man who had appeared out of the darkness. Everything about him should have frightened her, but somehow it did not. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that felt like safety rather than threat. And more than that, there was a loneliness in his eyes that matched her own. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked. Xavier looked away, back to the fire. "Because 8 years ago, someone showed me kindness when I needed it most. Because these mountains are beautiful but they are cruel, and I have seen what they do to people who are not prepared. And because you are sitting here spinning wool by firelight like it is the most important thing in the world, and that tells me you are strong enough to survive this, if someone just gives you a chance." Deanna felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time she did not try to hide them. "I accept your offer, Mr. Paulson, and I thank you." "Xavier," he said. "Just Xavier. We do not stand much on formality up here in the mountains. Then you must call me Deanna." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Deanna's fingers continued their work on the wool, the thread growing longer as the night deepened. She noticed Xavier watching her hands move, his expression thoughtful. "My mother used to spin," he said finally. "I remember sitting by the fire watching her, just like this. The way the spindle would turn round and round. It used to put me to sleep when I was small." "Where is your mother now?" Deanna asked softly. "Dead these 12 years. Cholera. My father and 2 sisters went with her all in the same week. I was 16. Xavier's voice was flat, but Deanna could hear the old pain beneath it. "I tried to keep the farm going, but I was young and stupid and I did not know what I was doing. Lost it 2 years later. Came west to make my fortune in the goldfields, but that did not work out either. Eventually I ended up here, and I realized these mountains were where I was supposed to be all along." "I am sorry for your losses," Deanna said, and she meant it. They shared this at least, this understanding of grief, of having everything torn away and having to build something new from the ashes. "And I am sorry for yours." Xavier stood, his height impressive even in the dancing shadows. "We should both get some rest. I will sleep over there by that big oak, keep watch. In the morning we will head to my cabin, It is a decent walk, but your horse can carry your things." Deanna nodded, suddenly exhausted down to her bones. She put away her spinning, banking the fire as Xavier had shown her. She wrapped herself in her thin blanket and lay down, using her bundle as a pillow. Across the fire, she could see Xavier's large form settling against the oak tree, his rifle across his lap. Despite everything, despite the strangeness of her situation, Deanna felt safer than she had in months. She closed her eyes and slept. The morning broke cold and clear, and Deanna woke to find Xavier already up, cooking something that smelled heavenly over the rebuilt fire. He handed her a tin plate with venison and some kind of fried bread, and she ate ravenously, not realizing how hungry she had been. "We should leave within the hour," Xavier said, pouring her coffee from a battered pot. "The walk is not hard, but I want to get back before the afternoon. I can feel weather coming." They broke camp efficiently, Xavier doing most of the heavy work while Deanna packed her few belongings. Her horse, a gentle mare named Bess, seemed to sense Xavier was trustworthy and allowed him to lead her without complaint. They set off into the forest, Xavier navigating the wilderness with the ease of long practice. As they walked, Deanna found herself studying him. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly. His face was weathered and tanned, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. His nose had been broken at least once, and there was a scar along his jawline that disappeared into his beard. But his eyes were kind, and his hands were gentle when he helped her over rough patches of ground. He was, she realized, probably not much older than she was, perhaps 26 or 27, though the wilderness had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with years. "Tell me about your cabin," she said as they climbed a steep ridge. "It is not fancy," Xavier warned. "2 rooms, like I said. The main room has the fireplace, a table and chairs, my bed in the corner. The other room is smaller, used to be where I stored supplies, but I moved most of that to the barn last year. It has a window and a small stove. You can have that room for yourself, make it yours. You built it all yourself, every log." There was pride in his voice. "Cut the trees, stripped the bark, notched them, and raised them. Took me near about a year, working alone. The barn came later, and that was faster because I knew what I was doing by then. I have chickens, a milk cow, 2 horses besides the one I use for riding. Garden in the summer that does well enough. I hunt for most of my meat, fish in the streams. It is a good life, solitary but good." "It sounds like you have built something real for yourself," Deanna said. Xavier glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "I have, but it can be lonely." The silence gets heavy sometimes. They crested the ridge, and Xavier pointed down into a small valley below. Deanna could see a clearing with a cabin made of dark logs, smoke rising from the chimney. Beside it was a barn, and she could see animals moving in a fenced area. Beyond it all, mountains rose in every direction, their peaks already dusted with white. "That is home," Xavier said simply. The cabin was better than Deanna had expected. Inside, it was clean and well organized, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. Xavier's bed was tucked in the far corner, covered with furs and thick blankets. The table was rough-hewn but solid, and there were shelves with dishes and supplies. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and the whole place smelled of wood smoke and pine. "The other room is through here," Xavier said, opening a door Deanna had not noticed. The smaller room was indeed smaller, but it had a window with real glass looking out on the forest, and a small iron stove in the corner. There was no bed, but Xavier brought in a rope frame and mattress from the barn, apologizing for the simplicity. To Deanna, who had expected to freeze to death in the woods, it looked like luxury. I will leave you to settle in, Xavier said. I need to check on the animals and get some things done before the weather turns. Make yourself at home. There is food in the larder if you are hungry. After he left, Deanna sat on the bed and let herself cry. Not from sadness, though there was that too, but from relief. From the overwhelming kindness of this stranger who had taken her in. From the knowledge that she would survive the winter, that she had been given a reprieve from the constant fear and uncertainty that had plagued her for weeks. When the tears passed, she unpacked her few belongings. Her spinning wheel, carefully disassembled, which she set up in the corner. Her clothes, which she hung on pegs Xavier had already installed in the wall. Her mother's Bible, which she placed on the small table beside the bed. And finally, wrapped in cloth, the small daguerreotype of her family taken 5 years ago. She looked at their faces, her mother and father young and strong, her brother just a boy, herself barely more than a girl. All gone now except for her. I am going to survive this, she whispered to their images. I am going to be strong, I promise. She found Xavier in the barn tending to a beautiful milk cow with soft brown eyes. He looked up when she entered, straightening from his work. Room is acceptable, he asked. It is perfect. Thank you, Xavier, truly, he nodded, looking almost embarrassed by her gratitude. I was thinking for dinner I could make a stew. I have potatoes from the garden and venison. It is nothing fancy, but it fills you up. Let me help, Deanna said. I am a decent cook and I should earn my keep. You do not need to earn anything. You are my guest. Please, Deanna said. I need to feel useful. These past weeks I have felt helpless and lost. Let me do something. Xavier studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, but we work together. That is how it is going to be this winter, Deanna. We are partners in survival. Not guest and host, not employer and employee. Partners. Agreed. Deanna smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. Agreed. They worked together in the cabin's kitchen area, Deanna peeling potatoes while Xavier cut the meat. They moved around each other with surprising ease, and Deanna found herself relaxing in a way she had not since before her family died. Xavier was easy to be around, his presence solid and reassuring. He did not try to fill every silence with chatter, seemed comfortable with quiet, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and often laced with dry humor that surprised her. So you are a spinner, he said as they worked. That is how you make your living. It was. My mother taught me when I was young. I could spin wool, flax, cotton, whatever was needed. I took in work from the neighbors, made a bit of money that way. It was not much, but it helped. Deanna paused in her peeling. I brought my wheel because I could not bear to leave it. It was my mother's and her mother's before that. It is probably foolish, carrying it all the way from Virginia. It is not foolish, Xavier said firmly. We all need something to connect us to where we came from, to who we were before life changed us. I have my father's watch, even though it does not work anymore. I carry it with me everywhere. That night, they ate the stew by the fire, and it was the best meal Deanna had tasted in months. Maybe it was the food itself, or maybe it was the company, the simple comfort of sitting across from another human being and sharing a meal. After they cleaned up, Deanna brought out her spinning and settled by the fire to work. Xavier watched for a moment, then asked if she minded if he carved while she worked. Not at all, Deanna said. He brought out a piece of wood and a knife, and his large hands moved with surprising delicacy as he began to shape it. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them, Deanna's spindle turning and Xavier's knife making soft shaving sounds against the wood. Outside, the wind picked up, and Deanna heard the first pattering of sleet against the cabin walls. The weather is here, Xavier said, glancing toward the door. We got back just in time. What are you carving? Deanna asked. Xavier held up the wood, and she could see it was beginning to take the shape of a bird. A chickadee. They stay through the winter here, these brave little things. I like to carve them. It is beautiful, Deanna said, and she meant it. The detail was incredible, each feather taking shape under his skilled hands. I will make you one, Xavier said, not looking up from his work. If you would like, a gift to welcome you. I would like that very much. The storm raged outside for 3 days, but inside the cabin, Deanna felt safe and warm. She fell into a routine with Xavier, both of them working together to maintain the household. She cooked and cleaned, mended his clothes, and discovered he had a shocking number of items that needed sewing. He chopped wood, tended the animals, kept the fires going. In the evenings, they would sit by the fireplace, Deanna spinning while Xavier carved, and they would talk. Deanna learned that Xavier had come from Pennsylvania originally, that he had a brother somewhere in California he had not seen in years. He learned that Deanna had always wanted to see the ocean, that she loved reading but had owned only 3 books in her life. They talked about their families, their losses, their dreams. Xavier told her about the mountains, taught her the names of trees and animals, described the way the meadows looked in summer when they were full of wildflowers. I would like to see that, Deanna said wistfully. You will, Xavier promised. Come summer, before I take you to Tennessee, I will show you the high meadows. They are the most beautiful thing you will ever see. On the 4th morning, Deanna woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried under 2 feet of snow. Xavier was already outside, digging a path to the barn, and Deanna watched him from the window. His breath steamed in the cold air, and his muscles bunched and flexed under his shirt as he worked with the shovel. There was something mesmerizing about watching him work, about the easy strength he displayed. She turned away from the window, confused by the warmth that had spread through her chest. She barely knew this man. Yes, he had been kind to her, had saved her life really, but these feelings stirring inside her were dangerous. Come spring, she would leave for Tennessee. She could not allow herself to become attached. But as the weeks passed and winter deepened its hold on the mountains, Deanna found it harder and harder to maintain that emotional distance. Xavier was simply too easy to care about. He was kind without being soft, strong without being domineering. He treated her with respect, never once making her feel unsafe or uncomfortable. When she woke from nightmares about losing her family, he would hear her cries and come to her door, asking if she was all right, if she needed anything. He never pushed, never intruded, but he was always there, a steady presence. One evening in late November, Deanna was sitting by the fire spinning when Xavier came in from outside, his arms loaded with wood. He had been adding to her fire regularly all evening, keeping the room warm while she worked. She had noticed he always did this, made sure she was comfortable, that she had enough light to see by, that the temperature was just right. You do not have to keep doing that, she said as he added more logs to the fire. I can tend the fire myself. I know you can, Xavier said, settling back into his chair. But I like doing it. I like watching you work. It reminds me of better times before everything went wrong. Deanna's hand stilled on the spindle. You talk as if your life now is not good, but from what I can see, you have built something remarkable here. I have, Xavier agreed, and I am grateful for it. But it has been lonely, Deanna. I did not realize how lonely until you arrived. These past weeks, having you here, it has made me remember what it is like to share my life with someone, to have someone to talk to cook for, to care about. Diana's heart was beating too fast. Xavier, I know, he said quickly. I know you are planning to leave come spring. I know I am just the mountain man who took you in, nothing more. But I need you to know that having you here has meant something to me. You have meant something to me. Deanna set down her spinning and looked at him, really looked at him. This strong, quiet man who had shown her nothing but kindness, who made her feel safe for the first time in months, who she looked forward to seeing every morning, whose voice she listened for, whose smile made her day brighter. "You have meant something to me too," she said softly. "More than I should allow, probably. More than is wise." Xavier leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his blue eyes intense. "Why is it not wise? Because come spring I have to go to Tennessee. I have to find my aunt. I cannot just stay here in the mountains forever." "Why not?" Xavier asked. "What is waiting for you in Tennessee, really?" "An aunt you have not seen in how many years?" "8," Deanna admitted. "But she is family. She is all I have left, or you could stay here with me." Xavier stood, moving closer, though he was careful not to crowd her. "I know this is sudden. I know we have only known each other a few weeks. But Deanna, I have been alone in these mountains for 8 years, and I have never once wanted to share my life with anyone until you. You fit here. You fit with me. I can feel it, and I think you can too." Deanna stood as well, her heart pounding. "Xavier, I cannot ask you to take on that burden. To tie yourself to me. It would not be a burden, it would be a joy." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, strong and gentle at once. "Stay with me, Deanna. Let me take care of you. Let me show you what life can be like here. If come spring you still want to go to Tennessee, I will take you, I promise. But give this a chance. Give us a chance." Deanna looked down at their joined hands, then up into his face. She saw hope there, and longing, and something deeper that made her breath catch. She thought about her life before, about the farm and her family and the girl she had been. That girl was gone, lost to grief and hardship. The woman she was now was stronger, harder, and she knew what she wanted. "I will stay through the winter," she said finally, "and we will see what happens. But Xavier, you need to understand I am not going to be some kept woman. If I stay, if this becomes something real, it has to be as your equal, as your partner." Xavier's face broke into a smile that transformed him, made him look younger and lighter. "I would not want it any other way. Partners, remember? That is what we agreed." He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, the gesture so tender it made Diana's eyes sting with tears. Then he released her and stepped back, giving her space. "I should check on the animals one more time before bed," he said. "Will you be all right?" Deanna nodded, not trusting her voice. After he left, she sat back down and picked up her spinning, but her hands were shaking too much to work. She had just agreed to stay with a man she barely knew, in a cabin miles from civilization, and she should be terrified. Instead, she felt lighter than she had in months, like something heavy had been lifted from her chest. December brought heavy snows and bitter cold, but inside the cabin, warmth grew between Diana and Xavier that had nothing to do with the fire. They were careful with each other at first, both aware that they were building something fragile and important. Xavier continued to sleep in the main room while Diana had her privacy in the smaller room, propriety maintained even in the wilderness, but they grew closer in other ways. Xavier taught Deanna to shoot, taking her out on clear days to practice with his rifle. She was a natural, her hand steady and her eye good. He taught her to read the weather, to identify animal tracks in the snow, to move quietly through the forest. She taught him to appreciate the small comforts of civilized life, to enjoy a well-set table, to find pleasure in small domestic rituals. One evening, Diana was sitting by the fire spinning while Xavier added wood to keep her warm, as had become his habit. She watched him work, his strong back bent to the task, his muscles moving beneath his shirt. When he turned back, he caught her watching and raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That I am happy," Deanna said honestly. "For the first time since my family died, I am genuinely happy, and it terrifies me." Xavier came and knelt beside her chair, his face level with hers. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because happiness can be taken away. I have learned that lesson well." "Everything can be taken away," Xavier said softly. "That is the nature of life. But Deanna, that does not mean we should not grab onto happiness when we find it. I spent 8 years alone in these mountains, telling myself I was content, that I did not need anything more. I was lying to myself. You have shown me what I was missing, what life could be like. I do not want to go back to that loneliness, and I do not think you want to either." Diana set down her spinning and touched his face, feeling the softness of his beard under her fingers. "No, I do not want that." Xavier turned his head and kissed her palm, the gesture tender and full of promise. "Then stay with me, not just through winter, forever. Marry me, Deanna, build a life with me here in these mountains." "We have only known each other 6 weeks, Deanna protested, even as her heart soared. "I know. And if you need more time, I will wait. I will wait as long as you need. But Deanna, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are meant to be here with me. I feel it in my bones." Deanna looked into his eyes, those striking blue eyes that had first caught her attention, and she saw her future there. She saw years of sitting by this fire, of working alongside him, of building something real and lasting. She saw children, maybe, playing in the meadow beyond the cabin. She saw growing old together, weathering storms both literal and metaphorical. She saw love, the deep, abiding kind that her parents had shared. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Xavier's face lit up, and he pulled her from the chair into his arms, holding her tight against his broad chest. Deanna wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid strength of him, the realness of him. When he pulled back to look at her, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I am going to make you so happy," he promised. "I am going to spend every day of my life making sure you never regret this choice." "I already know I will not regret it," Deanna said, and then she kissed him. It was her first kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed it would be. Xavier's lips were soft despite the roughness of his beard, and he kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. His arms around her made her feel safe and cherished, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "We should get married soon," Xavier said, his voice rough. "I do not trust myself to be a gentleman much longer with you under my roof." Deanna laughed, the sound bright and happy in the warm cabin. "How soon?" "There is a traveling preacher who comes through these mountains in winter. He should be in the area within the next few weeks. I can track him down, bring him here." Xavier's hands were still on her waist, holding her close. "Unless you want to wait until spring, have a proper wedding down in Williamsburg." "No," Deanna said firmly. "I want to marry you here in our home with the mountains as witnesses. I do not need anything fancy or proper. I just need you." Xavier kissed her again, deeper this time, and Deanna felt heat spread through her entire body. When they finally pulled apart, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I should go check on the animals," he said reluctantly. "The animals are fine. You checked on them an hour ago." "I know, but if I stay here, I am going to kiss you again, and then I am not going to want to stop, and you deserve better than that. You deserve a wedding first, vows spoken before God." Deanna smiled against his cheek. "You are a good man, Xavier Paulson, better than you give yourself credit for." "Only because of you," he said. "You make me want to be better." The next morning, Xavier set out to find the traveling preacher. He was gone for 3 days, and Deanna missed him with an intensity that surprised her. She kept busy, cleaning the cabin from top to bottom, baking bread, spinning wool for a new shirt she wanted to make him as a wedding gift. At night, she lay in her bed and thought about what it would be like when Xavier returned, when they were married and she could sleep in his arms instead of alone in this room. When Xavier finally returned, he brought the preacher with him, a kindly old man named Pastor Roberts who had been serving the scattered mountain communities for 30 years. He stayed for dinner, and Deanna was grateful that Xavier had warned her, as she had made extra food. "I am pleased to perform this ceremony," Pastor Roberts said as they ate. "Xavier here tells me you have known each other only a few weeks, but I must say, I have never seen him happier. The mountains can be lonely for a man alone, and it does my heart good to know he will have a partner." "I am the fortunate one," Deanna said, smiling at Xavier across the table. "He saved my life." "And you saved mine," Xavier said softly, "in every way that matters." They were married the next morning, standing before the fireplace where Deanna had spent so many evenings spinning while Xavier tended the fire. Deanna wore her best dress, and Xavier had trimmed his beard and hair, looking almost civilized. He held her hands as they spoke their vows, his voice steady and sure as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. When it was Deanna's turn, she looked into his eyes and spoke from her heart. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes," she said. "To be your partner in all things, to love you with everything I am, to make a home with you here in these mountains. You gave me a future when I thought I had none, and I will spend my life being worthy of that gift." Pastor Roberts pronounced them man and wife, and Xavier kissed her sweetly, his hands gentle on her face. After the preacher left, heading toward his next stop, Deanna and Xavier were finally alone as husband and wife. "I made something for you," Xavier said, going to his pack and pulling out a small wooden box. Inside was a necklace made of carved wooden beads, each one shaped like a tiny bird. "I made it while I was out looking for the preacher. I know it is not much, not compared to a real wedding gift." "It is perfect," Deanna said, her eyes filling with tears. "Will you put it on me?" Xavier fastened the necklace around her throat, his fingers lingering on her skin. Deanna turned to face him, and she saw the desire in his eyes tempered by patience. "I am nervous," she admitted. "So am I," Xavier confessed. "But we have all the time in the world. We do not have to rush anything." But Deanna found she did not want to wait. She took his hand and led him to his bed, the bed that would now be theirs. Xavier followed, his breath coming faster. They undressed each other slowly, Xavier's hands shaking slightly as he helped Deanna with the buttons of her dress. When they were finally skin to skin, Xavier pulled her close, and Deanna felt cherished and desired and safe all at once. "I love you," Xavier whispered against her hair. "I know it is soon to say it, but it is true. I love you, Deanna." "I love you too," Deanna said, and she meant it with her whole heart. "Now show me what it means to be yours." Xavier did, with patience and tenderness and a passion that left them both breathless. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the big bed, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, and Deanna knew she was exactly where she belonged. The winter passed in a haze of happiness. Deanna had never known marriage could be like this, full of laughter and warmth and quiet moments of profound connection. Xavier was an attentive husband, always making sure she was comfortable and happy. He still added wood to the fire while she spun in the evenings, a gesture that had become part of their routine, part of the intimacy they shared. She would work her spindle while he carved or repaired equipment, and they would talk about everything and nothing, simply enjoying each other's company. In February, Deanna realized she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening as they were getting ready for bed, and his face went through a series of expressions so quickly she almost laughed. Shock, joy, fear, and finally, a fierce protectiveness that made her heart swell. "Are you sure?" he asked, pulling her close, "As sure as I can be. I have missed my courses and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. My mother used to describe what it was like, and I remember." Xavier placed his large hand on her still flat stomach, his eyes wide with wonder. "A baby, our baby." "Are you happy?" Deanna asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy." Xavier's voice was choked. "Deanna, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled, and I cannot believe I am lucky enough to have you and now a child. I am going to be a father." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and that night he made love to her with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. As spring approached and Diana's belly began to swell, Xavier became almost comically protective. He barely let her do any work, insisted she rest constantly, worried over every little thing. Diana found it both frustrating and endearing. "Xavier, I am pregnant, not made of glass," she said one morning when he tried to carry her over a puddle in the yard. "I can walk through a bit of water." "I know, but what if you slip? What if you fall?" His face was so earnest, so concerned that Diana could not stay annoyed. "Then I will get up again. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. My mother worked on the farm right up until the day my brother was born." "Your mother did not have me as her husband," Xavier said firmly. "And I am going to take care of you." Diana sighed but let him lift her over the puddle. Truth be told, she loved being cared for, loved seeing this softer side of her mountain man husband. Spring came to the mountains in a rush of green and birdsong. The snow melted, revealing the world beneath, and wildflowers began to push up through the brown earth. Xavier took Diana to the high meadows as he had promised, and she gasped at the beauty of them. Fields of purple and yellow and white flowers stretched as far as the eye could see, with mountains rising on all sides, their peaks still touched with snow. "This is where I want to raise our children," Diana said, turning in a slow circle. "In a place this beautiful where they can run free and grow strong." "Children?" Xavier asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her, his hands resting on her swollen belly. "You are planning for more than one already, at least 3, Diana said firmly. "I was an only child for too long before my brother was born. I want a house full of children, Xavier. I want noise and chaos and love." "Then that is what we will have," Xavier promised. "Whatever you want, Diana, I will give you the world if I can." In late June, Diana went into labor. Xavier had already ridden to the nearest neighbor, a day's ride away, to bring back the midwife, an experienced woman named Mrs. Taylor, who had delivered half the babies in the mountain settlements. She arrived just as Diana's pains were becoming regular, and she shooed Xavier out of the cabin while she worked. Xavier paced outside for hours, his usual calm completely shattered. Every cry from inside the cabin made him flinch, and he wanted nothing more than to break down the door and go to his wife. But Mrs. Taylor had been firm. He would only be in the way, and he needed to trust her to take care of Diana. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard it, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Xavier froze, his heart pounding. A moment later, Mrs. Taylor opened the door, a smile on her face. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy, and your wife did beautifully. She is tired but fine. Come meet your child." Xavier entered the cabin on shaking legs. Diana was in their bed, propped up on pillows, looking exhausted and radiant at once. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and Xavier approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. "Meet your son," Diana said softly, pulling back the blanket. Xavier looked down at the red, wrinkled face of his baby boy and felt his entire world shift. This tiny human, this piece of him and Diana, was perfect in every way. Dark hair covered his head, and when he opened his eyes, they were blue like his father's. "He is beautiful," Xavier whispered, carefully reaching out to touch one tiny fist. The baby's hand wrapped around his finger with surprising strength, and Xavier felt tears roll down his cheeks. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking, if you agree, we could name him James," Diana said. "After your father." Xavier's throat closed up and he could not speak for a moment. Finally, he managed, "That would be perfect. James Paulson. Welcome to the world, son." Mrs. Taylor stayed for 3 days, making sure both Diana and the baby were doing well. Xavier hovered constantly, barely sleeping, making sure Diana had everything she needed. He was a natural father, taking to the role with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. He would walk the floor with baby James when he cried at night, his deep voice singing lullabies his mother had taught him. Diana would watch from the bed, her heart so full of love she thought it might burst. Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby. Diana would sit by the fire in the evenings, nursing James while she spun one-handed, Xavier adding wood to keep them both warm. They were building a life together, full and rich and real, and Diana had never been happier. One evening, when James was 3 months old and sleeping peacefully in the cradle Xavier had built, Diana and Xavier sat together by the fire. Diana was spinning, the familiar motion soothing after a long day, and Xavier was carving a small horse for James to play with when he was older. "Do you ever regret it?" Xavier asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of going to Tennessee, missing out on whatever life you might have had?" Diana set down her spindle and looked at him, this man who had become her entire world. "Never. Not for a single moment. This is the life I was meant to have, Xavier. You are who I was meant to find. That night in the forest when you came out of the darkness and added wood to my fire, that was the night my real life began." Xavier set down his carving and pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I feel the same way. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Diana Paulson. You and James, my family." "We should write to my aunt," Diana said. "Let her know I am well and married. I do not want her to worry." "We will go down to Williamsburg next month," Xavier promised. "Post a letter from there. Maybe even stay a few days. Let you see civilization again." "I do not need civilization," Diana said. "I have everything I need right here." They did make the trip to Williamsburg in September, and it was strange for Diana to be back in a proper town after so many months in the mountains. The noise and crowds felt overwhelming after the peaceful quiet of the cabin. But she posted her letter to her aunt, explaining everything that had happened, and she felt good about making that connection. To her surprise, her aunt wrote back within a few months, the letter reaching them through the postal system that served the mountain communities. Her aunt was delighted to hear Diana was well and married, and she understood completely why Diana had chosen to stay in Virginia rather than continue on to Tennessee. She sent her blessings and a small silver cup for baby James, which became one of the family's treasured possessions. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Diana had been right about wanting a house full of children. 2 years after James was born, she delivered twin girls, Sarah and Emma, who kept the entire household in cheerful chaos. 3 years after that came another boy, Thomas, and finally, 4 years later, a daughter they named Grace. The cabin grew to accommodate the expanding family. Xavier built additional rooms and then a larger house altogether, using the original cabin as a storage building. He taught his sons to hunt and track, passed on all the skills he had learned in his years alone in the mountains. Diana taught her daughters to spin and sew and cook, but she made sure they also learned to shoot and ride and take care of themselves. Through it all, the evening routine never changed. No matter how chaotic the day had been, no matter how many children needed tending or chores needed doing, Diana would settle by the fire with her spinning wheel after the children were in bed, and Xavier would add wood to keep her warm while she worked. It was their time, their ritual, a reminder of how they had started and how far they had come. One evening, when Deanna was 42 years old and Xavier was 45, they sat by the fire in the now familiar, comfortable silence. Their youngest, Grace, had just turned 14 and was asleep upstairs along with her siblings. James was 23 now and talking about building his own cabin on the far side of their property. The years had been kind to both Deanna and Xavier, though his hair was now streaked with gray and Deanna had lines around her eyes. "I was thinking today about that night I found you," Xavier said, breaking the silence. "Sitting alone by your little fire, spinning wool like the world was not falling apart around you." "I was terrified," Deanna admitted. "I thought I was going to die in those woods." "And I was lonely," Xavier said. "So lonely I had almost forgotten what it felt like to connect with another person. I had told myself I was content, but I was lying." Deanna set down her spindle and moved to sit on Xavier's lap, something she still did even after all these years. He wrapped his strong arms around her, and she rested her head on his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. "You saved me," she said softly. "In every possible way, you saved me." "We saved each other," Xavier corrected. "You gave me a reason to live again, not just survive. You gave me a family, a purpose, a future." "Everything good in my life came from that night when I decided to add wood to a stranger's fire." "It was the best fire you ever tended," Deanna said, smiling against his shirt. "It truly was." They sat together in the warm glow of the firelight, listening to the sounds of their sleeping children and the night wind in the trees outside. They had built a good life here in the mountains, full of love and laughter and hard work. They had weathered storms and hardships, celebrated victories and mourned losses. Through it all, they had stood together, partners in every sense of the word. When James married a girl from a neighboring settlement 2 years later, the wedding was held in the meadow Xavier had shown Deanna all those years ago. The whole community came, and there was music and dancing and so much food the tables groaned under the weight. Deanna watched her son and his new bride with tears in her eyes, remembering her own simple ceremony in front of the fireplace. "He is happy," Xavier said, coming to stand beside her. "He is. She is a good girl and she will be a good wife to him. He is a good man. We raised him right." Deanna leaned against her husband's solid bulk. "We did. We raised them all right." As the years continued to pass, the Paulson family grew. James and his wife had 3 children. The twins, Sarah and Emma, both married within a year of each other and started families of their own. Thomas went into business in Williamsburg, running a trading post that served the mountain communities, and he brought his wife and children to visit several times a year. Only Grace remained at home, but she had suitors aplenty and Deanna knew it was only a matter of time. Through all the changes, through the coming and going of children and grandchildren, Xavier and Deanna remained constant. Every evening they would sit by the fire together, Deanna spinning while Xavier added wood to keep her warm, just as he had done that very first night. It was their tradition, their connection, a physical reminder of the love that had grown between them. When Deanna was 60, she started having trouble with her joints, the spinning becoming painful. Xavier noticed immediately and began researching ways to help her, consulting with doctors in Williamsburg, and even trading letters with a physician in Richmond. He built her a special chair with extra support, modified her spinning wheel to make it easier to use, did everything he could to allow her to continue the work she loved. "You do not have to do this," Deanna said one evening, watching him make yet another adjustment to her wheel. "I can stop spinning. It is not the end of the world." "But you love it," Xavier said simply. "It is a part of who you are, and I am not going to let you give it up if there is any way to help." "I love you," Deanna said, not for the first time but with no less feeling. I love you too. Always have, always will. Xavier was 68 when he got caught in a late spring storm while checking his trap lines. He developed a cough that would not go away, and despite Diana's best efforts at nursing him, it worsened into pneumonia. She sat by his bedside for days, holding his hand, telling him stories of their life together, begging him to stay with her. I am not ready to let you go, she whispered on the third night, tears streaming down her face. We are supposed to grow old together, remember? You promised me years and years. Xavier opened his eyes, the blue dimmed by illness but still so dear to her. We have had years and years, Deanna, more than most people get. We have been so blessed. I need more time. Please, Xavier, please fight this. I am fighting. But Deanna, if I do not make it, I need you to know something. His voice was weak, but his hand squeezed hers with surprising strength. You are the love of my life, the best thing that ever happened to me. That night I found you by the fire, that was the night my life truly began. Every moment since has been a gift. Do not talk like you are saying goodbye, Deanna begged. I am not. I am just making sure you know. Xavier's eyes drifted closed. So tired, Deanna. Then rest. I will be right here. Xavier fought the pneumonia for another week, and slowly, gradually, he began to improve. It took months for him to fully recover, and he was never quite as strong as he had been before, but he survived. Deanna thanked God every day for allowing her to keep her husband a while longer. After his illness, Xavier seemed content to slow down. He passed the hunting and trapping duties to James and his brothers-in-law, focusing instead on his carving and spending time with his grandchildren. He had 16 of them now, ranging in age from infants to young adults, and he loved every single one. They would gather around him on visits, begging for stories about the old days, about how he had met their grandmother. She was sitting by a fire in the middle of nowhere, Xavier would tell them, his eyes finding Diana's across the room. Spinning wool like she did not have a care in the world, even though she was lost and alone and probably scared out of her mind. I took one look at her and I knew my life was about to change. But you did not fall in love right away, did you, grandfather? The children would ask. No, not right away. But Diana made it easy to love her. She was strong and brave and kind. She still is. Diana would blush like a girl at these words, even after 40 years of marriage. Xavier could still make her feel special, still make her heart flutter. When Diana was 70, their children threw them a party to celebrate their 40th wedding anniversary. The whole community came and the new house was packed with people. There was music and food and speeches, and Diana felt overwhelmed by the love in the room. 40 years, Xavier said in his speech, his arm around Diana's waist. 40 years since I convinced this beautiful woman to take a chance on a rough mountain man. Best decision I ever made was following that firelight through the woods. Second best decision was adding wood to her fire. Third best was asking her to stay. What was the fourth best? Someone called out. Xavier looked down at Diana, his eyes full of the same love she had seen on their wedding day. Spending every day since, making sure she never regretted saying yes. The room erupted in applause, and Diana buried her face in Xavier's chest, happy tears soaking into his shirt. They had 10 more years together, years full of peace and contentment. They watched their grandchildren grow and have children of their own. They saw Thomas's trading post expand into a successful business. They attended more weddings and christenings than they could count. And every single evening, unless illness prevented it, they sat by the fire together, Diana spinning while Xavier added wood, just as they always had. Xavier died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 80, Diana beside him as she had been for 50 years. The entire community mourned his passing, but they celebrated his life as well, the legacy he had left in his children and grandchildren, in the life he had built in these mountains he loved. Diana lived another 5 years after Xavier's death. She stayed in the house they had built together, surrounded by her family, and every evening she would sit by the fire with her spinning. Her children and grandchildren took turns adding wood to keep her warm while she worked, carrying on Xavier's tradition. She would tell them stories about their grandfather, about the love they had shared, about the life they had built. "He was the best man I ever knew," she would say. "He saved my life that night in the woods, and then he spent the rest of his life making sure I never regretted choosing him. I was blessed beyond measure." Diana died quietly one spring evening, her spinning in her lap and her family around her. They buried her beside Xavier in the meadow where they had loved to walk, where wildflowers bloomed every spring in a riot of color. The whole community came to pay their respects, sharing stories about the couple who had become legends in the mountains. James, now in his 50s, stood at his parents' graves after everyone else had left. He looked at the simple wooden markers his father would have approved of, and he smiled through his tears. "You did it," he said softly. "You built something that will last, not just this family but the love you showed us, the example you set. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of wildflowers, and for a moment James could almost hear his father's voice telling him to take care of his mother, could almost see his mother sitting by the fire with her spinning while his father added wood to keep her warm. It was the image that would stay with him, with all of Xavier and Diana's descendants, for generations to come. A testament to a love that had started with a simple act of kindness and had grown into something that would never truly die, living on in the family they had created and the legacy they had left behind. The Paulson family continued to thrive in those mountains, generation after generation, and they never forgot the story of how it all began. On cold winter nights, they would gather around their fires and tell the tale of the mountain man who found a woman spinning wool by firelight, who added wood to keep her warm, and who found in that simple act the love of his life. It became a family legend, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the smallest gestures of kindness, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm and last beyond a lifetime. The cabin where Xavier and Diana had first lived together was preserved by the family, becoming a shrine of sorts to their love. The spinning wheel Diana had used for so many years was kept there, along with examples of Xavier's carvings and other mementos of their life together. Newlyweds in the family would sometimes spend their first night there, hoping to capture some of the magic that had blessed Xavier and Diana's marriage. And in the meadow where they were buried, wildflowers bloomed every spring without fail, purple and yellow and white, just as they had when Xavier first brought Diana there all those years ago. The family tended the graves carefully, making sure they were never neglected, making sure that the love story that had started their legacy was never forgotten. Years turned into decades, decades into a century, and still the story was told. The mountain man and his spinner, two lost souls who found each other in the wilderness and built a love that would echo through generations. It was a story of kindness and courage, of choosing love even when it seemed impossible, of building something lasting in a harsh and unforgiving world. It was, the family agreed, the kind of story that gave them all hope, that reminded them what was truly important in life. And somewhere, in whatever realm souls go when they leave this earth, Xavier and Diana sat together by an eternal fire, her hands working an endless spindle while he added wood to keep her warm, just as he had promised to do for all eternity. Their love, forged in firelight and tempered by the years, had proven stronger than death itself, and it would burn on forever, a beacon for all who came after, a reminder that true love, once found, never truly ends.